Hi, I'm Caroline Leavitt. I'm the co-founder of A Mighty Blaze, which connects books, authors, readers, independent bookstores. We started during the pandemic and we're still going strong after 3 years, so thank you all so much. Today is really special. We have my friend and this wonderful, wonderful writer, Elizabeth Benedict, to talk about her book, Rewriting Illness, A View of My Own, which has been racking up the raves incredibly. And I had a copy of the book right here, and I don't know where it is right now. Do you have a copy, Liz?
Oh, I happen to have a copy somewhere.
Oh, good, because the cover is wonderful, and I want to show you.
I'm very happy with the
there
cover.
There it is. It's a great, beautiful cover, wonderful book. So let me tell you a little bit about Liz and read some of the praise, and then we'll talk. Elizabeth Benedict, whose novels include the national bestseller Almost and the National Book Award finalist Slow Dancing, authored the classic book on writing about sex and fiction, The Joy of Writing About Sex. And it's been in print for over 25 years. And if all of you look in the chat, I put up a whole lot of links where you can order all of her books. Also, if you have questions, put them up in the chat, and we will get to them in a half hour. She's written reviews and articles for the New York Times, Boston Globe, Esquire, Real Simple, and 1,000 more. She writes about sexual politics, money, and literature, and on figures from Monica Lewinsky to British psychoanalyst Adam Phillips. She conceived of and edited 3 prominent anthologies, including the New York Times bestseller, What My Mother Gave Me, 31 Women on the Gifts That Mattered Most. Her books are featured regularly on All Things Considered, Fresh Air, and BBC. And most importantly, she's one of my favorite people and a beloved friend, and I'm thrilled to have her here talking about her book. So let's read some of the praise for it. Zigrid Nunez says, memoirs of serious illness are often good suspense stories, and this one is a page turner. It's the kind of inspiring book you want to share with all the important people in your life. Stephen Macaulay says, Rewriting Illness is a superbly intelligent and surprisingly entertaining memoir about what happens when a lifelong fear of illness collides at last with the illness itself. And let's see, Mara Lieso from NPR says, the moment every woman dreads of finding a lump where no lump should be is a jumping off point for Elizabeth Benedict's startling, self-aware, and wickedly funny memoir. And there's like a whole bunch more, but I want to start talking to Liz herself. So first, thank you so much for being here, Elizabeth, and talking about your book.
Thank you for having me. And thank you, Caroline and Jenna Blum and the whole Mighty Blaze team for appearing on the scene, creating yourself at the beginning of COVID when all these writers were just lost because bookstores closed as people's books were coming out. And Caroline and Jenna and the whole group did something that was really phenomenal.
Thank you so much. We refuse to give up. We're all Pollyannas. We're all Pollyannas and lunatics. Okay, so I want to start the question with, this book is so much about having your fear of illness, which I think, every woman faces when we go and get a mammogram. But then you had that fear realized. How do you think, how did you ever think when you were ruminating in your mind about what would you do if this happened to you? How different was that from what you did do when it happened to you?
Wow. Not sure I know how to answer that because it's so many layers to it.
I know, I'm sorry for you.
But as I explain in the book, and you just spelled out, I have been a hypochondriac for some time, since a girl in my high school class died of lymphoma when she was 17.
Oh, dear.
And it was, I was only at that school for 2 years. And one of those years was the year in which this 17-year-old girl died. And it was a very small class of 22 girls, and one of them died. And she came in one day and said, I have this bump here, and she was dead about 2 or 3 months later. So it was a very devastating thing for me. I wasn't friends with her, but we were all in the same senior lounge that had one couch, and it really kind of rewired my nervous system. And so I was always sort of anticipating something would happen to me. or always fearing it. And I think women have those fears.
Oh yeah.
You go get a mammogram every year because they want to see if you have breast cancer. It's like the fears come naturally from outside. It's not like we just cook these things up, right? It wasn't our idea. It was like the world is, saying, hey, we're looking for cancer every month. You should be looking for cancer. Every week you should be looking for cancer.
That's right.
It's like, how could you not be something of a hypochondriac?
Right.
But I'm also a freelance writer. And so for all of my life as an adult, almost all of my life, I've had my own health insurance, and I've had to pay attention to having health insurance. And as anyone knows who's a freelancer, it's extremely difficult and expensive to get health insurance. And so as somebody who was always afraid I'd get sick, I was always, I don't think I ever went a day of my adult life without having health insurance. I mean, I wasn't somebody who said, oh, I'm not going to do it for the next 6 months.
Oh, no, you have to have it.
Yeah. But I know there are people who don't. But anyway, I was very, I had a file that was basically, if I got sick, if I needed to incorporate my college essay business, I could incorporate it quickly, and then I could get a different level of health insurance. And I knew about that. And so I found this lump in my armpit one night, Thursday night at 11 p.m. And at 9 a.m., I called my doctor. And at 9:05, I called my accountant. And I said, let's incorporate my business so I can get this new health insurance. So, and that health insurance enabled me to go to any doctor I wanted to, which turned out to be very valuable. So I was a hypochondriac, but I also was very practical, and I sort of made these quote unquote plans. And fortunately, it worked out. The health insurance went from $800 a month to $1,800 a month. And
oh my God!
And I fortunately could pay that, but I couldn't pay it for long. Okay. So I had enough money to pay it for the next 6 months, for the rest of the calendar year. But I didn't know what was going to happen after that. But that health insurance enabled me to go eventually to the best doctor in the world about lymphoma, so I was very, very lucky in a lot of ways to have the $1,800, to have the health insurance and so forth. So when you say, how was my fear different from what I imagined? I sort of kind of had these backup plans, these weird backup plans, because I was so concerned. And of course, I'd gone many years without ever having to do those things. But everything else did not go according to plan. Okay, so the health insurance that went well. But I went to the doctor the next day. I was hypervigilant. And I got a sonogram 2 days later. And I learned 6 weeks later that the sonogram had been mismeasured. The lumps were actually bigger than they had been measured to be. But I didn't know that for 6 weeks. And that began a protracted, extended, ridiculous 3-month period during which I was not diagnosed. And it took 3 months to diagnose what turned out to, I think if you have a very rare form of whatever it is, whether it's cancer or something else, and it takes months of investigation, this thing was right here. It was like anybody could feel it. It was not something buried deep in some body part. And just a whole series of doctors who kept saying, oh, we think it's a swollen lymph node, and let's wait. And maybe it's something else, and maybe it's this, and maybe it's that. And it just went on and on and on. And then I went on summer vacation, and then the doctor who was treating me went on summer vacation right after he did a biopsy. And I felt this profound helplessness. I went for the biopsy. I was told I probably had lymphoma. The doctor did a second level biopsy. And then he said, okay, I'm going on vacation Friday until the middle of September. And I was just, and you think you'd say, what do you mean you're going on vacation? You can't go on vacation. I couldn't say that. How could I say that to a doctor? You can't go on vacation. Number one, that would have been silly. Number two, I couldn't have found another doctor. It was the middle of August. There are no doctors, right? And this
Right.
guy had just done a biopsy, and one doctor had already said, looks like lymphoma. And then the other guy said, well, we're doing another one, and now I'm going on vacation. So it was still another month, more than another month from that day that I was actually given a diagnosis. And the doctor gave me the diagnosis. It's very formal. It has all these numbers and letters and all kinds of stuff, very hard to understand, with his precise diagnosis. And then he said, call the lymphoma treatment director at our hospital, major New York hospital. I immediately called that doctor and was told that he had a 2-month waiting list. So, I mean, you can laugh about it now, but it was like,
It's not yet at the moment.
I was like, what? 2 months? And I said, you must be joking. I mean, I've been a patient in this hospital for 2 months waiting for a diagnosis. Sorry, that's all I can do. There are just no other appointments.
And no other doctors? Nobody on call?
This was the director of the lymphoma treatment.
Right, okay.
Whatever. Okay. I hung up the phone, or whatever we do with phones now, threw it across the room. And I fortunately had been speaking to a friend by accident, so not someone I was in touch with often. And she had said to me, my mother went to a lymphoma specialist 15 years ago, and he was great, and here's his number. And she said, I think he might be retired, but here's his number. And having this experience, I looked him up. He was not retired. He was 78 years old. I called his office, and his secretary said, he'll call you tonight, honey. And he called me that night. And it was like I went from zombie medicine to this man who called me at 6:20 at night, gave me his cell phone number, asked me to read all the numbers on my pathology report. And then he said, you're a writer. Have you ever thought about writing a book about somebody with red hair? Have you ever thought about writing a book about people who are left-handed? And I was like, no, but those sound like really good ideas. I mean,
wow.
And this guy called me. He said, I'll call you tomorrow. Don't worry. So I went from he gave me a cell phone number. And so I went from, this kind of see around medicine to I'll call you tonight and here's my number. And this man treated me, and he was really, he's now retired. He just retired a few months ago, but he was the leading lymphoma specialist in the world. And so I really went from, a kind of a really bad situation, like the worst situation, to the best. But it was all very serendipitous. It was not, there was no great plan. My original doctor who ignored me and told me that I had a swollen lymph node and that my anxiety was really terrible, and she wanted to help me with my anxiety.
I guess why.
She had nothing to do with anything that happened, what nothing to do with the outcome. And once I was diagnosed, a doctor from that office called me, and I said, I never want to speak to anyone in this office again.
Great. Were they surprised when you said that?
I don't think so. I mean,
they probably didn't care. That's just the medicals.
Yeah. I don't know. I take that back. I don't know whether they were surprised. I'm sure it's upsetting to hear that. Obviously, I never spoke to the actual 2 people who told me my anxiety was my problem. I can't speak to them. I don't go to that office. I went to another doctor in that office, but it's hard to sort of pull out the message or exactly what happened. But what the experience showed me is that you have to kind of do it yourself. It's do-it-yourself medicine these days, unless you have an extremely conscientious doctor who says, okay, I'm going to send you to this person. Now I'm going to send you to this person. But this was not that. This was, here's a prescription, go find an endocrinologist. Here's a prescription, go do this. Very, very lazy, but also overwhelmed. Okay?
Right. They are overwhelmed. Did you Google stuff? Were you, looking for solutions online and getting more and more overwhelmed, or was it helpful?
All of the above. I initially, the first thing I Googled was what could be causing this. And on the theory that it was a swollen lymph node, I spent about a month trying to make my lymph node go down. So I did everything that is known to the natural alternative medicine community about making your lymph nodes go down. So I did like 4,000 jumping jacks, and I drank turmeric tea until I got sick, and I drank apple cider vinegar, and I put hot compresses, and I went into the steam room at my gym. So I did just about everything I could of the natural sort to reduce swollen lymph nodes, but I didn't have a swollen lymph node.
And so when was the moment when you decided you were going to write about this? I mean, was the moment when you decided it was going to be a book? Because I imagine as a writer, you were just writing about it to make sense of it at first.
Yeah, I was just sort of taking notes. You
Right.
take, and my guru in this was a very dear friend who had cancer 40 years before, and she said, bring a notebook, write down everything.
Right.
And write down everything, because you're not going to remember it. You think you're going to remember it because
No,
it's
you don't remember anything.
It's so dramatic, but you don't remember it. And then you have all these names of medicines and so forth. So I had all these notes, and I had all these postcards, and I had emails to people. And I think early on I thought, well, I can't write a cancer memoir. There have been 4 billion cancer memoirs. Nobody wants to read a cancer memoir. So, I kind of dismissed it for a long time, but I was mostly focused on my health and getting well and
Right.
doing the treatment that I was told to do, and dealing with all of my despair and fear, and just sort of getting through day by day. And so it wasn't until probably this was sort of the fall, winter, until the spring, that I thought, okay, if I were going to write about it, where would I begin? And I also knew that the world really didn't need another cancer memoir. So I was very reluctant to write it. But at the same time, it was kind of the story I had to tell at that point. And I was also reluctant to write it because even though I responded to the treatment, which was a little unclear at the time, I'm unclear whether I would, I responded to the treatment. There's a 2-year period when they're monitoring you to see whether it recurs. And you're kind of...
I would think that's scarier than being in the midst of everything. Was it?
No, I think it was a little less scary.
A little less scary?
A little less scary. But
okay.
But what it meant in terms of writing was that I didn't know what kind of book this was, because I didn't know whether I had made, quote, made it, or whether this was going to be an ongoing condition that I would have to treat or not survive. So there were 2 years, and I don't think I talked to anybody. I mean, I told my husband this, but I didn't tell very many other people that there was this 2-year window or 2-year period when I was kind of holding my breath. And so as far as writing something, I didn't quite know what the story was. I didn't know what the tone of it was. Like, could I look back at this thing that happened and I survived,
right.
or so it took a long time. So it was hard to know how to write whatever I was going to write because of that. But I did just, I sort of wrote down what happened in a narrative, and no one liked it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's so surprising to me. Okay. So what did they say? Why didn't they like it? Did they just say?
Well, I think it was, no one said these words, but I think it was boring. And I think it was just, this happened. I mean, it wasn't just this happened and that happened.
Right.
But I think it lacked, I suppose in some way it lacked an interesting voice, because I wasn't sure what my voice was.
Right.
I mean, right. My voice was, am I a survivor or am I an ongoing cancer patient? I mean, that's a pretty big distinction. So what is my voice? Can I be triumphant about this, or can I be kind of, what's the word, in limbo, And so when you don't know what your relationship is to the material, it's hard to find a voice, right?
Right, right. But so many critics have mentioned that this book is a page turner.
Okay, but
No?
they're not reading the book that I'm talking about. Okay.
Oh, I see.
Okay.
I see. Okay.
I wrote down what happened, and then nobody liked it.
Okay.
And then the pandemic happened. And one of my friends, who's an editor and a very good reader, said, I don't think anybody but your friends is going to be interested in this. And I said, okay, got it. I hear you loud and clear. And then the pandemic happened. So it was sort of like, nobody was going to be interested in this. And I put it aside for 3 or 4 months. And then I went back to it and started revising it as best I could with not much guidance, but just the idea that it wasn't very interesting. And then let me tell you, and then I had a conversation with a writer friend whom I didn't speak to often. He didn't know I was sick, but I had a conversation with him about something else. I said, I'm writing this book, cancer, blah, blah, blah. And he said, how long is it? I said, 250 pages. And he said, well, it's too long. Nobody with cancer wants to read a long book. And then he said, how long are the chapters? And I said, the usual 10 pages, 20 pages. He's too long. No, he said, I'm writing a book and no chapter is longer than 900 words. Not one word longer.
Wow.
And I said, oh, okay. And he said, now you need an elevator pitch for your book and you need a really good title and you can't have long chapters. So I was like, okay. He hadn't read a word. But I, again, hung up the phone or whatever we do with I guess I turned off the phone or whatever we do with them now. And I rewrote the book with this idea that no chapter would be longer than 900 words. I just listened to everything he said. It was like, he was like my prophet. And I just rewrote the whole book. And I just took, I guess I printed it out. I'm very big on printing things out. I printed it out with a pen and pencil and started pulling out bits that became the book that it is now. And as I pulled them out, these titles kind of flashed in my head. And the titles, they just really surprised me. It was like popcorn popping. But I started writing these very funny titles to these sections. Some were funny, but they were kind of like, I was kind of yelling at myself, titles. Or some of them were just, okay. And some of them were just, let me just read some.
Yes, please do.
What I Do for Money is one of the titles. It Could Have Been Worse, in quotes, is one of the titles. What I Wanted to Say to the Doctor is one of the titles. I Don't Think You Have Cancer, in quotes, is one of the titles.
Oh, God.
My Own Private Hypochondria, one of the titles. Jackie O's Hair is one of the titles. But these titles just kind of appeared. And suddenly there was something completely different about the story I was telling. And it had a kind of lightness that it hadn't had before. And a kind of energy that it hadn't had before. And I could sort of tell I begin the book talking about this girl in my high school who died. I could tell that story as a sort of little introduction. And then I could go 40 years ahead to when I found the lump in my arm. And it didn't seem like a violation of the narrative to do that with these little chapters, right?
It's so funny because I actually have a note up here where I say your book is written in bite-sized moments, which actually added to the intimacy, as well as with those punchy chapter headlines. Those short kind of bite-sized moments made me feel like I was bearing witness to what you were going through. And I think that's what made it, I don't know, I think that and the punchy titles were what made it so different from all other cancer memoirs. So after you wrote it like that, did you know then, okay, now I think I have something?
Well, I had to show it to a few people, and I sent it to one of my readers who had endured many versions. And she said, yeah, I think this is it. I think this is good. But she knew me and she knew the whole story. And so I valued her opinion. But then I sent it to somebody who had no idea I was sick, and whom I write about her in the book. I had lunch with her when I had a wig on because I had no hair, I didn't tell her I was sick. I didn't tell her I had had cancer. So I pretended during the whole lunch that nothing had happened to me. So she knew nothing, but she had been with me, for this lunch. Anyway, I sent it to her and I said, I just wrote this book. I'd love for you to read it. So she was reading it completely cold. And she said, I think it's really good. I'll help you sell it. I really like it. So that
Right.
meant a lot to me because she was so far outside my life and outside the story. And there were, by that time, there were a lot of people who read different drafts and knew me, but I wanted somebody completely outside. So at that point, having those two readers made me think, okay. And then I sent it to my agent, whom I think you know, and
Yes.
And she said that this is terrific. So the book changed. I mean, it was a completely different book from what I started to how it ended. And to the book you're reading now, that was, because my friend said, don't write any chapters longer than 900 words. And I listened to him. I just said, oh, okay, he's right. Yeah.
He was right. I wanted to ask you about, this whole issue of silence or who you tell when you're sick. I know Nora Ephron told just about nobody when she had cancer.
Right.
How did you maneuver that? Did you tell selected people or did you keep it quiet or?
I guess I told people on a need to know. I mean, I told my very closest friends. I told the people I'm in touch with all the time. I told my sister. And then I told people who'd had cancer, friends of mine who'd had cancer, because I just felt like those were the people I wanted to talk to. And so if you were a friend of mine and you hadn't had cancer, I wasn't going to call you up and say, oh, God, I have cancer. Or I have lymphoma. But of course, unfortunately, I have a lot of friends who have survived cancer. So I had a long list of people to call. But I liked talking to those people because they were survivors. And, I knew that they'd been through something. And I didn't, if a friend called and said, I'm going to be in New York next week, can you have dinner? I'd say, well, actually I can't, but if you weren't one of those people who called and said they were going to be in New York, I probably wasn't going to tell you. And so there were a lot of people that I didn't tell. I didn't tell a lot of relatives who I thought would be very upset, who'd had sick children of their own. So that was a deliberate lie. And I couldn't, bear to have to tell them anything. But I didn't tell any of my neighbors. So, when my hair was growing back, they said, oh, your hair is so short. What happened? And I said, I just wanted to try something new. But I really wanted to keep this a secret. I never told a hairdresser, even when my hair was growing back and I went to the hairdresser to do something with the thing on my head, I didn't say, oh, this is from chemo hair. I never said a thing. I really went out of my way not to talk about it. But as I say, I did call people who'd had cancer. So it was, and then there were a few other people I knew who'd had a lot of cancer in their lives and seemed to have a lot of cancer wisdom, And so I wanted to talk to them.
Richard Peabody says, hi, Liz.
Hi, Richard Peabody. Hi. He's not one of the people I told, and I'm very glad he's here. Hi, Richard.
I wanted to ask you about the way people talk about cancer, almost as if cancer has a warlike personality, because people always talk about we're fighting cancer, we're killing it. Is there a gentler way to talk about having cancer, like living with it for now until it goes someplace else, or
I'm suffering from cancer.
Right.
The cancer, the warlike metaphors is something that Susan Sontag explored in her landmark book, Illness as Metaphor. And she said, and this was written in 1978, so light years ago in terms of cancer treatment. And she said, talking about cancer as though you're going into battle, as though you're in a war, is really bad for patients because it makes people feel like they're not going to win, because how could they go into battle? It's like, this lonely little soldier fighting cancer, which is this huge thing. And she said, this is a really, we should stop turning it into a metaphor and just talk about it as an illness, because people aren't getting the treatment they need because of this. And I thought a lot about this when I was sick and as I was writing the book. And I thought, well, has that changed since 1978? Because I think it was really much more of a battle when Susan Sontag was writing this. And when she was going through it, she was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer in 1975. And she was given a very grim prognosis. And she said, I will fight this until the ends of the earth. And she found treatment, and she lived for another 30 years. But she was very, but she was living at a very different time. So I was trying to figure out whether enough has changed in cancer treatment so that it's not quite as much of a war. Okay. And I guess what I would say is, for a lot of, there are many more cancer treatments and much better outcomes now. Even though people are still getting cancer in record numbers, the treatments are dramatically different. And so I think it's a little bit less of a battle that the individual goes into with this disease that is going to conquer you. I think it is. And if you go, I had to get a biopsy, which was an operation, and it was at Mount Sinai, and I walked into this patient sort of waiting area that was called like oncology. There was an arrow, and you go to oncology, and all these people are waiting for operations. There were like 200 people there. I mean, maybe not 200. There were like 75 people.
That's a lot.
Every single chair was full of someone. I mean, was occupied by someone who was either there because they were like me, they had to get a biopsy, or they were, the relative of someone, but it was a mob. When I would go for radiation at Weill Cornell, they have locker rooms and snacks, and it's a huge, I know this sounds banal to anybody who's been through this, but it's a huge industry of treating cancer because it's so prevalent, but it's also it can be very effective. And treatments now for a lot of cancers are extremely effective. So it's a little bit less of a war than it was 50 years ago. I think we can talk about it as I'm getting cancer treatments. I'm in treatment.
Yes, that's better. That's much better. That sounds much better and much more positive.
And I think it sometimes feels that way. I'm getting treatment with all these dozens of other people who are also here getting radiation therapy, because there are these amazing treatments that people are devoting their lives to finding.
You said that illness will make you humble and you'll learn something. I wonder if there was what did you learn? And do you think you would have learned it if you hadn't been ill?
Well, my friend Dina, my cancer guru, Dina, told me that. She said, it'll make you humble and you'll learn something. And so I spent a lot of time looking around going, was that the thing I was supposed to learn? Like, what was I supposed to learn? Where was that? And then I think, well, live one day at a time. I said, no. I already knew that. I didn't need to have cancer to learn that. I'm not sure that I got one specific message. I think cancer is too complicated to just come out of it learning one thing. I learned a lot of things, and I think I'm still learning them, because as I talk to people about the book and I hear other stories, I learn more. I guess one of the things is that there's a huge amount of misdiagnosis and gaslighting of patients, and doctors who put people off and who don't want to do certain tests. And so I've learned that what happened to me is unfortunately very common, that it takes a long time to be diagnosed. it shouldn't take as long as it did.
It
But
shouldn't take as long.
I learned that if I'm ever in that situation again, I ask for a fine needle biopsy, an FNA, which is, I didn't even know what that was. But that's the first stage of a biopsy. Any woman knows when you get a mammogram, if they find something, they do an FNA. I had never had that done to me, but that's the first stage where they stick a needle in and they extract a few cells and put them on a slide. And then they look at them in a microscope very quickly. It's not a complicated thing. And that's the beginning of a biopsy. That doesn't tell you very much. It just tells you if you have abnormal cells. I would have asked for that, in week 2 if I'd known about that. But people were saying, oh, you need a biopsy, but that could be like surgery. And they don't want to do that unless they have. So I learned about the FNA. And I will tell people about, ask for a fine needle aspiration biopsy whenever you have something that nobody wants to deal with. And there are at least 3 stages of biopsies. So it's not just one thing. I learned that it can take a long time to be diagnosed for something that seems very straightforward. And that's just right there and you can feel it. You're not going to get diagnosed in a day or sometimes a week. It will take longer than that. I thought I'd know by Tuesday, So I think that there are some practical things that I wish I'd known and that I try to pass on to people. And the other thing is it's very hard to ask a lot of questions of your doctors. And
why?
Well, in my case, it was hard because I was so terrified of what they might say. But sometimes people say they're afraid to ask questions because the doctors seem like they're in a rush. I didn't.
And
I
they
never.
are.
Yeah. And they are.
Yeah.
I get that. That wasn't why I didn't ask questions. I didn't ask them because I was terrified that they'd say, 2 months to live and that's it, or whatever. There's no hope for you. I mean, I was just I was afraid to ask questions because I didn't want a lot of information. But I think a lot of people feel that way. I've since heard from a lot of people. They say, "Yeah, I don't want to know too much. Just I'll do the treatment. I'll get it over with. Don't tell me too much." So I think doctors don't say a lot because they know that some people don't want to know too much. The other thing is that as much as we think doctors know, they don't know. They
know, right.
They don't. They can say, "I think this is going to work, but I don't know," or this is a treatment that's worked in these cases. Will it work in your case? We hope so. So it's not like doctors have a magic answer that they're withholding from you.
Right.
So there's a lot of uncertainty. And I think I didn't understand the extent to which there's uncertainty about what's going to happen.
Did you get a sense that doctors were getting better about talking to cancer patients in general?
I'm not sure I'm going to answer that.
Right?
I guess, yeah, sure, of course. I have no idea because I had nothing to compare it to, and because I was so intimidated about asking any questions that I wasn't. I was a very obedient patient. I did what they said. I showed up. I did everything, but I was kind of a little. People who know me don't believe this, but I was a little on the quiet side. I all of my New York moxie just disappeared. Like I was just like, oh, because I was so afraid, and so I really grappled with what the fear, how dominating the fear was, and I'd like to think I won't be quite so afraid if this happens again.
That was going to be my next question.
I think that I should say, oh yes, I think I'll be less fearful. We'll see.
So how did you feel when you finished the book? I mean, now that the book's finished and it's out there and you're getting all these rave reviews, how has that particular stage of all this changed you?
Well, it's very startling in some ways because I had kept it such a secret for such a long time. And, I mean, as all of us know, there are people on Facebook who discuss every aspect of their
Right.
medical lives. And so
Right.
it's something people do now. And I've just never said a word. So it's a little strange to kind of be coming out as a cancer patient or former cancer patient. But I suppose it's also, I feel a little bit exposed, like I'm not wearing quite as many clothes as I usually do. But it's also nice because people tell me about what's happened to them.
Yes.
And I'm part of this community. Nobody wants to be in this club, but I'm part of the club.
But you're part of it.
And I also feel like because of the ways that I like I can be on your show and I can be on different radio shows and podcasts and talk to people, I can help people and I can give advice that maybe they wouldn't be able to get, or maybe the internet, finding out about medical things on the internet is a very scary thing. And because you don't want to find out too much, but you want to have enough to know kind of if you're going in the right direction, but you don't want to find out too much. And the information is often
wrong,
really bad.
Yeah.
And it doesn't fit you, and you can scare yourself to death with it. So and your doctor isn't going to tell you these things. So it's nice to think that in some cases I can tell people things that they might not know otherwise. And to the extent I can do that, I'm happy to do that. I mean, my book is not a self-help book. And I wouldn't have written a self-help book because I think I didn't really have enough advice that I thought I could give people. But having written this story, people have said that they felt like they understood. They've been through so much of this themselves that they feel somewhat comforted by it, and they feel like they have a companion.
That's exactly right. You took it. It's like bearing witness to your journey, and it makes everyone feel better. I have one last question for you, which I ask every time. What's obsessing you now, and why?
Oh no.
I know. You can tell my personality from that.
What's obsessing me now? I guess what I'm going to do next. And I have a few different ideas, but I don't have a big thing that I'm just chomping at the bit to start. I have a few different things. So I guess what I'm going to do next, and like when I'm going to know what that is, and
you'll know when it happens.
Yeah. And I hope I don't have to get cancer to have something else to write about. But no, I think I'm a little bit. I think that's if I'm obsessed about something.
So I want to tell everybody again to please go to your favorite indie, or you can go to bookshop.org. Buy Elizabeth's book. Buy all of her books are absolutely wonderful. So you might as well buy all of them. And we'll see. This will be available on YouTube forever on the Mighty Blaze station. So you can look there. You can add comments there if you want. And we'll see all of you next week. Liz, you just stay on. Bye, everybody.